You know, I've been thinking about how the January 6th committee revolutionized the congressional hearing as we know it and turned it into a multimedia 21st century presentation. And I'm wondering when we're going to do that with the State of the Union address. When are we going to get beyond the president standing at the podium, reading in a way that those 62% simply don't understand?
Well, obviously, we wish as many people as are going to watch the Super Bowl would watch the State of the Union. But, you know, 11% of the country one night watching television is not insignificant. So especially as I don't have to tell you in this media environment when people have so many options and so many different ways to get information. So it's a significant night for the president, no question, and an opportunity for him to speak directly to the American people about, as you lay out, everything he's accomplished in the last 2 years. And you'll hear that from him. You'll hear a lot about what he's accomplished and the impact that those things, the infrastructure law, the Safer Communities gun law, the Inflation Reduction Act, he's going to talk about not those bills, but the things that they did and the impact that they're going to have on people's lives. But it's also going to be a very optimistic speech. And he's going to talk about how we can finish the job and how we can keep getting things done over the next 2 years. So you will certainly hear him talk in plain language directly to the American people about what he's been able to accomplish over the last 2 years. But you're going to hear him lay down a vision for how we keep building on the economic progress we've made, how we build on the historically low unemployment, the fact that inflation is coming down. You're going to hear him talk about how we can continue to move forward. And so that's what people will hear when they tune in for the speech tomorrow night.
Will there be veto threats? And let's just listen to the kind of veto threat the president has already issued. Will there be something like this? Let's listen to this.
I introduced a bill that will eliminate the IRS and replace it with a 30% national sales tax. It's not going to happen. I'm going to veto the sucker if it ever got to me. I know the Republicans ran on inflation last election. I didn't know they were trying to make it worse.
Is a version of that in the address tomorrow night?
You are definitely going to hear him lay down his core principles. He's going to, for example, make very clear he is not open to cuts to Social Security or Medicare. He's not open to a default on the full faith and credit of the United States as we have this conversation about the debt ceiling. He's not open to the debt ceiling being used as a negotiating tactic. So he is not going to shy away from being very clear about the things and the places where he disagrees with Republicans that are non-starters for him. No question about it. But you're also going to hear him talk about the places where we can find common ground. I mean, remember when he was elected to office, people said, you know, in this day and age, there's no way to get things done in a bipartisan way anymore. You're never going to get Republican votes. We've got this biggest infrastructure bill done with Republican votes. We got the biggest gun safety bill passed in the last 30 years with Republican votes. We got a historic package for veterans to help with their health benefits with Republican votes. So he's shown that we can actually come together and do things, that we can find common ground and get things done, which is what the American people want. That's what they want to see their elected officials do. So you're going to hear him make that case, too. He's going to talk about the need for unity in this country, which he fundamentally believes we cannot abandon. So, yes, you're definitely going to hear him lay down the places that are non-negotiable for him, but you're also going to hear him talk about how we can come together, and we should come together, and that's what we want to do to keep moving forward and finish the job over the next 2 years.
We have some photographs of the president in speech prep with White House staff. There's one shot we just had up on screen with Steve Ricchetti sitting beside him there at the conference table. There's his... There's Steve, and Anita Dunn is there with the president. She's prepared. And Steve and Anita have worked with presidents before on these kinds of speeches. When they started working on this speech, that China balloon was still in the sky, and I'm sure there was a China passage, at least one, in the earlier drafts of this State of the Union address. What has the weekend's events and the shooting down of the balloon done to the speech?
Well, of course, there was a passage on our relationship with China. It's a critically important relationship. It's one the president has talked quite frequently about needing to navigate to a place of competition, not a place of conflict. Obviously, he has had open lines of communication. He's spoken with President Xi a number of times since he took office. So, of course, there was language in the speech about our relationship with China. Now, there's been a lot of, I would argue, breathless reporting over the last 24, 48 hours about what the situation with the balloon has done to the speech. I would say I would not overcrank on changes made to the speech as a result. Obviously, again, this is you're going to hear from him in the State of the Union about his approach to foreign policy, how he is asserting American leadership across the globe, and of course our relationship with China. But what I would say about the balloon is obviously the president handled it directly, effectively, took down the balloon over territorial water so that we could collect intelligence on the balloon as it traveled. We prevented it from collecting intelligence and collected intelligence back on the balloon and ultimately brought it down without doing any damage or causing any danger to American lives. So the president handled it effectively, and certainly you will hear from the president more broadly about our relationship with China in the State of the Union.
And Kate, quickly before you go, we have a report tonight indicating the president is planning a trip to Poland on or near the one-year mark from when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
Nothing I can say yet about travel plans, but certainly when there are plans, if there are plans to be shared, we will do so.